Imagine two people who want to change their lives. The first person decides that everything must be different starting Monday. They will wake up early, exercise every morning, stop eating junk food, read every night, save more money, spend less time on their phone, become more organized, and finally finish the project they have been postponing. Monday feels powerful. Tuesday feels manageable. By Thursday, the new life is beginning to negotiate with the old one. A few weeks later, most of the ambitious plan has disappeared. The second person does something much less impressive. They decide that every evening, immediately after brushing their teeth, they will read 2 pages of a book. 2 pages. It barely feels like self-improvement. Months pass. The first person's dramatic transformation has mostly become a memory. The second person, however, has developed something more important than a reading streak. Reading before sleep now feels normal. 2 pages often become 5. 5 sometimes become 20. Books begin replacing late-night scrolling. The person starts thinking of themselves as someone who reads. Nothing spectacular happened on any particular night. And that is precisely the point. One of the central insights behind James Clear's Atomic Habits is that meaningful change often looks insignificant while it is happening. We naturally notice events. Habits operate more like processes. A promotion is an event. Developing the reliability and competence that eventually makes someone promotable is a process. Losing 10 pounds is an event. Eating, sleeping, moving, and shopping differently for months is a process. Finishing a novel is an event. Sitting down repeatedly when nobody is watching is a process. Human beings are attracted to visible turning points because turning points make good stories. But much of life is constructed in the quieter territory between them. Atomic Habits is fundamentally a book about that territory. Its subject is not merely productivity. It is the psychology of repeated behavior, why certain actions become automatic, why good intentions so often collapse, how surroundings influence choices, how identity can stabilize behavior, and why improving the system that produces your actions may matter more than obsessing over a distant result. But there is a deeper question underneath all of this. Why is changing ourselves so difficult when we often know perfectly well what we should do? Knowing that exercise is beneficial does not automatically produce exercise. Knowing that excessive spending creates problems does not prevent unnecessary purchases. Knowing that sleep matters does not make someone put down a phone at midnight. Information matters, but information alone rarely governs behavior. We are creatures of knowledge, but also of repetition, convenience, emotion, expectation, identity, social pressure, physical surroundings, and immediate rewards. Understanding habits means understanding how all of these forces interact. And once we do, personal change begins to look less like a test of character and more like a problem of behavioral design. Consider something almost everyone has experienced. You walk into the kitchen without being particularly hungry. There is a bowl of candy on the counter. You take one. You probably did not conduct an internal debate. You did not establish a strategic objective. You saw it. You reached. You ate it. Now imagine the candy is inside an opaque container on the highest shelf of a cabinet. Your values have not changed. Your nutritional knowledge has not changed. Your personality has not changed. But your behavior probably will. This simple difference reveals one of the most important ideas in habit formation. Behavior is deeply sensitive to context. We like to imagine that our acts from a stable inner commander called willpower. Sometimes they do. But enormous amounts of behavior are responses to what is visible, easy, familiar, socially reinforced, or immediately satisfying. The phone beside your bed invites one kind of morning. Running shoes beside the door invite another. A television already turned on creates one evening. A book sitting open on your pillow creates another. This does not mean objects control us like puppets. It means behavior has friction. Some actions require more effort than others, and even tiny differences in effort can influence what happens repeatedly. Suppose you want to practice guitar. In one version of your apartment, the guitar is inside its case, behind several boxes, at the back of a closet. Practicing requires opening the closet, moving the boxes, removing the case, taking out the guitar, finding a pick, and sitting down. None of these tasks is difficult. Together, however, they create a small psychological toll. Now imagine the guitar sits on a stand beside the chair where you relax after dinner. You see it. You can reach it. You play for 3 minutes. Those 3 minutes matter not because 3 minutes of practice will transform your musical ability, but because the environment has changed the probability of beginning. And beginning is frequently the bottleneck. This is where small habits become psychologically interesting. A small habit is not merely a miniature version of a large achievement. Its real power is that it lowers the threshold required for repetition. Imagine someone who has not exercised regularly in 5 years. If the new rule is to complete an exhausting 60-minute workout 6 days a week, the person is not simply attempting exercise. They are attempting a radical lifestyle transition every morning. The difficulty is not only physical, there is scheduling, preparation, discomfort, uncertainty, travel, clothing, recovery, and the emotional resistance associated with doing something unfamiliar. Now reduce the initial behavior. Put on exercise clothes and walk for 10 minutes. That seems almost absurdly small, but psychologically, something important has changed. The action is easier to repeat. Repetition makes the context familiar. Familiarity reduces uncertainty. The person begins learning when exercise fits into the day. Shoes acquire a location. The route becomes known. The transition from intention to action becomes less complicated. Eventually, 10 minutes can become 20, but even if it does not immediately expand, the person is practicing something fundamental, showing up. This leads to the compounding metaphor at the heart of atomic habits. Small changes can accumulate. The idea sounds almost mathematical. Improve a little, repeatedly, and eventually the accumulated difference becomes substantial. But behavioral compounding is more complicated than financial compounding. Human improvement does not proceed at a perfectly stable percentage. You do not become exactly 1% more patient every day. You cannot calculate creativity to 3 decimal places. Skills plateau, motivation fluctuates, injuries happen, families change, jobs become stressful, unexpected opportunities appear. Sometimes one breakthrough produces more progress than months of gradual work. So the value of the compounding metaphor is not numerical precision. Its value is temporal perspective. It asks us to stop judging repeated behavior only by its immediate result. Suppose you save a small amount of money today. Your financial life barely changes. Suppose you practice a foreign language for 15 minutes. You may not feel noticeably more fluent. Suppose you choose water instead of soda at lunch. Your body does not suddenly transform. Suppose you write 300 words. You do not have a book. This creates a psychological problem. Many beneficial behaviors have delayed rewards. Many harmful behaviors have delayed costs. The dessert is enjoyable now. The health consequences, if they come, arrive later. Buying something unnecessary is exciting now. The financial constraint appears later. Avoiding a difficult conversation feels relieving now. The damaged relationship develops later. Exercise is uncomfortable now. Many of its benefits emerge gradually. Saving money restricts consumption now. Security grows later. Studying requires concentration now. Competence appears later. Human beings therefore live inside a mismatch between immediate experience and long-term consequence. Habits can bridge that mismatch because they reduce the need to reconsider the decision every time. Imagine having to decide every night whether brushing your teeth is worth the effort. You would need to review dental science, estimate future costs, compare them with your current fatigue, evaluate toothpaste options, and generate motivation. Fortunately, most people do nothing of the sort. The behavior has become sufficiently automatic that deliberation is unnecessary. This is one reason habits are powerful. They transform actions from recurring negotiations into defaults. But there is another layer. Repeated behavior does not only produce results, it produces evidence about who you are. This is where identity enters the picture. Suppose 2 people are offered a cigarette after deciding to quit. One thinks, I am trying not to smoke. The other thinks, I don't smoke. The external behavior may initially be identical. Both refuse, but the psychological framing differs. The first identity still contains smoking. Smoking remains part of the person's normal self, temporarily being resisted. The second framing treats smoking as inconsistent with who the person is becoming. This distinction can be powerful because identity changes the meaning of behavior. If you think of yourself as someone who hates exercise, Every workout feels like an exception. If you think of yourself as an active person, skipping movement may begin to feel like the exception. If you think of yourself as hopeless with money, a budget becomes a temporary restriction imposed on your supposedly authentic nature. If you begin seeing yourself as someone who handles money deliberately, the same budget becomes an expression of identity. But identity is not magic. Repeating "I am a writer" does not produce a manuscript. Declaring "I am healthy" does not alter physiology. The useful version of identity-based change is grounded in evidence. You write today. That is one piece of evidence. You write again tomorrow. Another piece. You continue after a bad week. More evidence. Eventually, the statement "I am someone who writes" stops sounding aspirational and begins sounding descriptive. The behavior supports the identity, and the identity begins supporting the behavior. This creates a feedback loop. Action shapes self-perception. Self-perception influences future actions. Consider a person who has always described themselves as disorganized. This label seems harmless, perhaps even funny. Then something happens. Because they believe they are disorganized, they are less surprised when they lose things. Because losing things seems consistent with their identity, they feel less urgency to create systems. Because they create fewer systems, they continue losing things. The identity becomes self-confirming. Now imagine replacing the grand declaration "I am an organized person" with a more modest experiment. Every time this person finishes using their keys, the keys go into the same bowl near the door. Nothing else changes. After several weeks, they stop searching for their keys. Then bills get a designated location. Then important digital files acquire a consistent naming system. The interesting change is not that the person has achieved perfect organization. It is that the old identity has become less convincing. They now possess counter-evidence. Maybe I am not inherently disorganized. Maybe organization is partly a set of behaviors. That maybe can be psychologically liberating. We often mistake repeated behavior for fixed personality. Someone who repeatedly arrives late becomes a late person. Someone who avoids public speaking becomes bad at speaking. Someone who abandons projects becomes someone who never finishes anything. Some of these descriptions may capture real tendencies, but identities can harden around behavioral history until yesterday becomes a prediction of tomorrow. Habit change offers another possibility. Identity can be treated less like a permanent essence and more like an evolving interpretation of repeated evidence. Yet this idea also has a danger. Identity can become too rigid in the opposite direction. Imagine someone who becomes deeply attached to the identity "I am a runner." For years, running structures their life. Then an injury prevents them from running. If the identity is flexible, they may adapt. They can swim, cycle, rehabilitate, or discover other forms of movement. If the identity has become narrow, the injury threatens more than a habit. It threatens the self. Who am I if I cannot run? This reveals an important limit of identity-based behavior change. Identity is useful when it organizes behavior without imprisoning the person. A healthy identity might be "I take care of my body." Running can express that identity, but so can resting when injured. A broader identity remains stable even when circumstances require behavior to change. The same principle applies elsewhere. "I am a successful entrepreneur" can become dangerous if it prevents someone from admitting that a business is failing. "I am the reliable one" can become destructive if it makes asking for help feel like betrayal. "I am disciplined" can become brittle if one missed routine produces shame. Identity helps habits when it creates direction. It harms us when it becomes a courtroom in which every deviation is treated as evidence of personal failure. This matters because behavior change is not simply about constructing habits. It is also about recovering from broken habits. Everyone eventually misses. You get sick. A child wakes during the night. Work becomes chaotic. You travel. You experience grief. A deadline consumes the week. The fantasy of perfect consistency is attractive because it makes change seem controllable. Real life is not perfectly controllable. The psychologically important skill is therefore not never breaking the pattern. It is returning. Imagine two people who both exercise 4 times a week. Both miss Monday. The first interprets the missed session as information. Monday became unexpectedly busy. They exercised Tuesday. The second interprets it as identity. Here we go again. I have no discipline. They skipped Tuesday too. The original difference was one missed workout. The larger difference came from interpretation. This is one reason perfectionism can quietly sabotage habit formation. If success means perfect compliance, one deviation creates total failure. But if success means maintaining a pattern over time, deviation becomes manageable. A habit is not destroyed by one unusual day any more than a healthy relationship is destroyed by one disagreement. Patterns matter more than isolated events. This returns us to the basic mechanics of habits. A habit usually begins with some kind of cue. Something happens. You feel bored. Your phone is visible. A notification appears. You reach for it. Or you enter the kitchen. You see the coffee machine. You begin preparing coffee. Or you finish dinner. You walk toward the couch. The television remote is already there. Soon these sequences become linked. Context predicts behavior. The brain learns associations. This is efficient. Imagine if every ordinary action required full conscious attention. You would spend enormous mental energy deciding how to make coffee, tie your shoes, lock the door, drive familiar roads, or prepare for bed. Automaticity frees attention, but the same mechanism that makes useful routines efficient also makes unwanted routines stubborn. The habit does not ask whether it serves your current values. It has simply learned that in situation A, behavior B often follows. This means changing a habit can require intervening at multiple points. You can change the cue. You can change the attractiveness of the behavior. You can make the action easier or harder. You can change what happens afterward. Suppose someone automatically checks social media while working. The obvious strategy is to demand more self-control. But consider the behavioral sequence. A difficult task creates mild frustration. Frustration produces a desire for relief. The phone provides immediate novelty. Novelty feels rewarding. The brain learns something. When work becomes uncomfortable, the phone offers escape. Now the habit makes sense. The person does not necessarily have a mysterious phone addiction appearing from nowhere. They may have developed a highly efficient discomfort avoidance loop. That suggests several interventions. The phone can be placed in another room. Notifications can be disabled. The person can work in shorter intervals. A distracting website can require an extra login. The phone screen can be made visually less stimulating. Most importantly, the person can recognize the actual cue, not merely the phone, but the feeling of difficulty. This distinction matters. If you remove one distracting app without understanding the function it served, another distraction may replace it. You delete one platform and begin checking news. You block the news and start browsing online stores. You stop shopping and begin reorganizing your desktop. The surface behavior changes. The underlying escape pattern remains. This is one place where a simple habit framework can become much deeper. Habits are not merely repeated movements. They often regulate emotion. We eat because we are hungry, but sometimes we eat because we are anxious. We check messages because communication matters, but sometimes we check because uncertainty is uncomfortable. We work excessively because work matters, but sometimes we work because achievement protects us from feeling inadequate. We procrastinate because tasks are difficult, but sometimes we procrastinate because beginning creates the possibility of discovering that we are not as capable as we hoped. If we treat every unwanted behavior as a mechanical loop, we can miss what the behavior is doing psychologically. Imagine someone who eats dessert every night. A straightforward habit intervention might remove dessert from the house. That could work. But suppose dessert is the person's only deliberate moment of comfort after 12 exhausting hours of work and caregiving. Removing the food changes the behavior. It does not solve the deprivation. Something else may eventually take its place. This does not make environmental design useless. It makes environmental design one layer of a larger human problem. Behavior has functions. Understanding those functions matters. Still, environment is often more powerful than we acknowledge. Modern environments are not neutral. They are full of invitations. A streaming service invites continuation. A supermarket places certain products where attention is likely to land. A smartphone compresses entertainment, communication, shopping, work, gambling, news, music, photography, and social approval into a device that can remain inches from the body all day. Under these conditions, telling people to simply exercise discipline can become strangely incomplete. Imagine trying to reduce your consumption of cookies while carrying a warm plate of cookies everywhere you go. That would sound ridiculous. Yet many digital temptations function almost exactly this way. They are continuously available. This is why friction matters. A tiny obstacle can have disproportionate effects when repeated decisions are involved. Suppose your television automatically opens a streaming service when you turn it on. Watching something requires almost no effort. Reading requires standing up, finding a book, selecting one, and sitting somewhere with adequate light. The environment has cast a vote before your conscious decision begins. Reverse the arrangement. Leave the book on the coffee table. Remove batteries from the remote and place them in a drawer. Now reading has become easier and television slightly harder. The difference is tiny. That is the point. Habit design often operates through tiny differences. People sometimes resist this idea because it seems manipulative. Shouldn't I be able to choose freely? But there is no environment without influence. The cookies are either visible or hidden. The phone is either beside you or somewhere else. The television is either central to the room or it is not. The healthy food is either convenient or inconvenient. Your workplace either makes interruption easy or makes concentration easier. The question is not whether environments influence behavior. The question is whether that influence happens accidentally or deliberately. There is also a social environment. Human beings watch one another. We absorb norms from families, workplaces, communities, friendships, and cultures. If everyone in your social group drinks heavily every weekend, reducing alcohol consumption may require more than personal resolve. It may affect belonging. If your colleagues routinely work late, leaving on time can feel like a moral statement even when nobody explicitly criticizes you. If your friends exercise together, physical activity may become both easier and socially rewarding. If everyone around you treats saving money as deprivation while treating expensive consumption as success, financial habits exist inside a social story. This exposes another limitation of purely individual approaches to behavior change. Not all habits are created in isolation. People inhabit systems. A worker with unpredictable shifts may struggle to maintain a consistent sleep schedule for reasons that cannot be solved by placing a book on a pillow. A parent caring for a newborn does not have the same control over morning routines as someone living alone. A person living in an unsafe neighborhood may face different constraints on outdoor exercise. Someone with 2 jobs has a different relationship with time than someone with substantial schedule flexibility. Economic pressure, health, caregiving, disability, culture, housing, employment, and social obligations can all shape what behaviors are realistic. A habit framework becomes misleading when it quietly transforms structural constraints into personal moral failures. Sometimes the environment needs redesigning. Sometimes the person has very little power to redesign it. This distinction matters. Good behavioral advice should increase agency without pretending agency is unlimited. There is another seductive feature of habit thinking: measurement. Tracking can be extremely useful. Put an X on the calendar each day you practice piano. Record each workout. Track spending. Mark each day you avoid a particular behavior. The visible record creates feedback. It can also make progress satisfying. But measurement can distort behavior when the metric becomes the objective. Imagine someone trying to become a better reader. They begin tracking the number of books completed. At first, this motivates them. Then something subtle happens. Short books become more attractive because they increase the count faster. Difficult books become annoying. Rereading seems inefficient because it does not add a new title. Pausing to think feels unproductive. The metric has started competing with the purpose. The person is maximizing completed books rather than understanding. The same problem appears everywhere. A person obsessed with step counts may pace around the living room at night while ignoring strength, mobility, or sleep. A writer focused exclusively on daily word counts may produce thousands of words that should never survive editing. An employee measured by emails answered may answer more emails rather than solving more important problems. A teacher rewarded only for test scores may unintentionally teach toward the metric rather than toward durable understanding. Habits benefit from measurement, but measurement should remain subordinate to meaning. The question is not merely, did I repeat the action? It is, what is this repeated action supposed to accomplish? This brings us to goals. Goals are useful. They give direction. A marathon date creates specificity. A savings target creates clarity. A deadline can concentrate attention. A goal can transform a vague wish into something concrete. But goals have a weakness. They describe outcomes without necessarily explaining the recurring behaviors that produce those outcomes. Two football teams can enter a championship wanting exactly the same thing. Only one wins. Two students can want the same grade. Two companies can want the same market position. Two people can want to lose the same amount of weight. Wanting the outcome does not explain the difference. Systems live underneath goals. A system is the recurring structure that makes certain behaviors more likely. For a student, the goal may be passing an exam. The system includes when they study, how they test themselves, where their phone is, how they identify weak areas, how they sleep, and what they do when confused. For someone trying to save money, the goal may be a particular bank balance. The system includes automatic transfers, purchasing rules, recurring subscriptions, shopping triggers, social spending patterns, and how financial decisions are reviewed. For a writer, the goal may be publishing a book. The system includes when writing happens, how ideas are captured, how drafts are revised, how distractions are handled, and how the person returns after unproductive days. Goals tell you where. Systems shape how. There is another reason systems matter. Goals often contain an endpoint. Once the endpoint arrives, motivation can collapse. Someone trains intensely for a wedding and then abandons exercise afterward. Someone studies a language for a test and stops using it after passing. Someone aggressively saves for a purchase and then returns to old spending patterns. The goal succeeded. The behavior disappeared. A system has a different orientation. It asks, what pattern can continue? This question can radically change how we approach improvement. Suppose you want a clean home. You can spend an entire Saturday cleaning. By evening, the goal is achieved. The house is clean. But if objects still have no designated locations, laundry still accumulates unpredictably. Mail still lands wherever convenient, and nobody has routines for maintaining shared spaces, the house will gradually return to its previous state. The cleaning event solved the visible problem. It did not change the system generating the problem. This principle reaches far beyond habits. Many recurring problems are outputs of recurring systems. If you are constantly late, the problem may not be insufficient motivation to arrive early. It may be unrealistic estimates of preparation time. If you repeatedly overspend, the problem may not be lack of financial ambition. It may be that spending is frictionless, while saving requires active effort. If your inbox continually becomes overwhelming, heroic clearing sessions may not matter if every notification is allowed to become an interruption. If you constantly abandon exercise plans, the issue may not be laziness. You may repeatedly choose routines designed for an imaginary version of your life rather than your actual schedule. Systems force us to examine causation. What repeatedly produces this result? That question is often more useful than, how badly do I want a different result? Yet systems thinking has limits too. A system cannot solve everything. Some human problems are not optimization problems. Grief is not a failed habit. Loneliness cannot always be engineered away through a checklist. A crisis of meaning is not necessarily caused by poor environmental design. Trauma, depression, addiction, chronic stress, and other serious difficulties may involve processes far beyond ordinary habit formation. Even normal life contains situations where spontaneity, exploration, and reflection matter more than automaticity. A person could theoretically optimize every hour and still create a life they do not actually want. That possibility deserves attention because habit literature can accidentally encourage a strange fantasy that the ideal human being is a perfectly efficient collection of routines. Wake at the correct time, drink the correct beverage, exercise, journal, read, work, meditate, track everything, repeat. But efficiency is not the same as wisdom. You can become extremely efficient at pursuing the wrong objective. You can develop excellent habits around work and gradually neglect relationships. You can become disciplined about fitness and become psychologically rigid about food. You can optimize productivity until unstructured time begins to feel guilty. You can build a magnificent system for climbing a ladder without asking whether the ladder is leaning against a wall worth climbing. Habits answer the question, how can repeated behavior become easier and more consistent? They do not automatically answer, what deserves repetition? That second question belongs to values, and values require reflection. This suggests a useful hierarchy. Goals can express what we want. Systems can organize how we move toward it. Habits can automate recurring pieces of the system. Identity can give those habits psychological coherence, but values must still determine why any of it matters. Without that layer, behavior change can become technically sophisticated and existentially empty. Imagine a successful executive who wants to become more productive. They eliminate distractions. They optimize meetings. They wake earlier. They automate administrative work. They create perfect routines. Their output increases substantially. But the original problem was not insufficient output. The original problem was that they were already working too much and had almost no meaningful time with their family. Their habit system succeeded mechanically while failing humanly. A better question would have been different from the beginning. Not, how can I get more done? But what kind of life am I trying to make possible? Then productivity might still matter. But perhaps the relevant habit would be leaving work at a consistent time. Perhaps the environmental intervention would be keeping the phone outside the bedroom. Perhaps the identity would shift from, I am the person who is always available, to, I am someone who protects attention for what matters. The mechanics of habit formation are powerful precisely because they are neutral. They can reinforce almost anything. That is why awareness matters. Another complication is motivation. Habit systems often emphasize designing behavior so that motivation becomes less necessary. This is sensible. You should not need a heroic emotional state to perform ordinary beneficial actions. But motivation cannot be removed entirely. There are periods when the system breaks: a move, a new job, a breakup, an illness, a child, retirement, travel. Suddenly the old cues disappear. The gym is no longer on the way home because the way home has changed. The morning writing routine vanishes because the new job begins earlier. The meal routine changes because someone else now shares the kitchen. Habits are often context dependent. This explains why life transitions can be both dangerous and promising. They disrupt automatic behavior. That disruption can destroy good habits, but it can also weaken bad ones. When the old context disappears, behavior becomes temporarily negotiable again. Imagine someone who buys a pastry every morning on the way to work. They pass the same bakery. They smell the food. They know the staff. The routine becomes automatic. Then the company moves offices. The new route contains no bakery. For several weeks, the person simply stops buying pastries. They may think their self-control improved, but perhaps the cue vanished. This reveals something profound about behavior. Sometimes we attribute too much to character because we cannot see context. We call ourselves disciplined when the environment makes discipline easy. We call ourselves weak when the environment makes temptation constant. A more compassionate and scientifically useful perspective asks what conditions are producing the behavior. That does not eliminate responsibility. It makes responsibility more intelligent. Instead of saying, why can't I control myself? We can ask, what repeatedly happens before this behavior? Instead of, why am I so lazy? Ask, what makes beginning difficult? Instead of, why can't I focus? Ask, what is competing for my attention and why is it easier or more rewarding? Instead of, why do I always quit? Ask, what changes between the first enthusiastic week and the fourth ordinary week? These questions turn judgment into investigation, and investigation creates options. There is also the question of reward. Habits survive more easily when something about them feels satisfying. This creates another tension between immediate and delayed consequences. Suppose someone begins learning Spanish because they hope to travel comfortably several years from now. That future benefit may be meaningful, but psychologically distant. If every practice session feels like tedious memorization, the long-term goal may not provide enough reinforcement. But suppose the person starts watching simple videos they genuinely enjoy, speaks weekly with a friend, and notices that phrases previously incomprehensible are becoming understandable. Now the process contains its own rewards. Progress becomes visible. This principle matters because sustainable behavior often needs some satisfaction before the final destination. A life cannot be lived entirely on delayed gratification. If the journey is consistently miserable, the system becomes fragile. This does not mean every useful action must be enjoyable. Some valuable things remain difficult. Training can hurt, studying can frustrate, writing can feel uncertain, parenting can be exhausting. Meaningful relationships require uncomfortable conversations. The point is subtler. A sustainable system needs enough reinforcement to survive reality. Sometimes the reward is pleasure, sometimes it is pride, sometimes it is relief, sometimes it is belonging, sometimes it is visible progress, sometimes it is simply the quiet satisfaction of behaving consistently with the person you want to be. That last reward returns us to identity. Imagine ending a difficult day. You are tired. You intended to write for an hour, but an hour is no longer realistic. There are two ways to interpret the situation. One is outcome focused. An hour is impossible, so today is lost. The other is identity focused. What is the smallest meaningful action that keeps the relationship with writing alive? Perhaps you write one paragraph. That paragraph will not transform the manuscript, but it can preserve continuity. This is one reason small habits can be disproportionately valuable during difficult periods. Their function changes. On good days, they produce progress. On bad days, they preserve identity. There is an enormous difference between doing less and disappearing entirely. The person who walks for 5 minutes during a chaotic week is not pretending 5 minutes equals a full workout. They are maintaining contact with the pattern. The person who reads one page during an exhausting month is not claiming one page produces mastery. They are keeping the door open. This is psychologically important because restarting can feel much harder than continuing imperfectly. Momentum is not mystical. It is partly the reduction of decision costs. Once a behavior has a place in life, repeating it requires less negotiation. After it disappears for months, the negotiations return. When should I do it? Where? How much? Which program? Which book? Which method? Should I start Monday? The infrastructure has vanished. Tiny continuity preserves some of that infrastructure, but we should be careful not to worship streaks. A streak is a tool. It is not a moral score. If someone exercises for 200 consecutive days and then becomes sick, the streak ending does not erase the physiological benefits of the previous 200 days. Yet people sometimes experience broken streaks as catastrophic. This is another example of a metric overtaking its purpose. The purpose of a habit is not to protect a number. The purpose is to serve something valuable. When the number helps, use it. When the number begins controlling you, reconsider it. The broader lesson is that habits should remain servants. They are extraordinarily useful servants. They are terrible masters. Now consider what happens over a much longer period. A teenager begins writing a few lines every night. At first, the habit seems trivial. Years later, they have thousands of pages of observations. Perhaps they become a writer, perhaps not. But they have developed attention. Another person begins walking after dinner. At first, it is simply 10 minutes outside. Years later, those walks have become conversations with a spouse. The physical habit has also become a relational ritual. Another person automatically transfers a small portion of every paycheck into savings. The early amounts seem almost meaningless. Years later, the accumulated money changes what risks they can afford to take. The habit has created not merely wealth, but options. This is where compounding becomes more interesting than simple accumulation. Repeated behavior can change future possibilities. Knowledge compounds because understanding one concept can make another easier to learn. Relationships compound because repeated trust can make deeper vulnerability possible. Skills compound because basic competence enables more advanced practice. Savings compound because resources create flexibility. Health behaviors can compound because energy makes other actions easier. And identity can compound because evidence changes expectation. The result is not always linear. Sometimes the biggest consequence of a habit is not what it directly produces, it is what it makes possible next. This also explains why negative habits can compound in ways that remain invisible for a long time. Avoiding one difficult conversation may create little damage. Avoiding every difficult conversation can slowly fill a relationship with unresolved resentment. One impulsive purchase is rarely catastrophic, A recurring pattern of spending beyond income can narrow future choices. One night of insufficient sleep is ordinary. Chronic sleep disruption is different. 1 hour of distracted work is recoverable. Years of fragmented attention may shape what kinds of difficult projects a person can complete. The danger is that delayed consequences allow patterns to continue while appearing harmless. Then one day the outcome seems sudden. The relationship breaks. The debt feels overwhelming. The project fails. The body demands attention. But what looks sudden may be the visible arrival of an invisible process. This is perhaps the deepest psychological shift encouraged by habit thinking. Learn to see trajectories before outcomes. Do not ask only, where am I? Ask, what direction does this repeated behavior point? Someone may currently be financially comfortable while developing increasingly reckless spending habits. Someone else may currently have little savings while consistently building financial discipline. The first person has the better snapshot. The second may have the better trajectory. Someone may currently be physically fit because of years of previous training while gradually becoming sedentary. Someone else may currently be out of shape but has begun walking, sleeping better, and exercising consistently. Again, snapshot and trajectory tell different stories. We tend to judge ourselves by snapshots because snapshots are visible. Habits invite us to think in trajectories. But trajectories are not destiny. A small negative habit does not guarantee catastrophe. A small positive habit does not guarantee success. Life contains randomness, unequal circumstances, biology, institutions, relationships, luck, historical events, and forces outside individual control. This is important because the language of compounding can become morally dangerous if interpreted too literally. If success is explained entirely by good habits, then failure can be blamed entirely on bad habits. Reality is more complicated. A person can build excellent systems and still encounter illness, economic crisis, discrimination, family emergencies, accidents, or simple bad luck. Another person can have mediocre habits and receive extraordinary opportunities. Habits influence probability. They do not control reality. That distinction makes the framework stronger, not weaker. We do not need habits to explain everything for them to explain something important. They explain how repeated actions can become easier. They explain why context matters. They explain how delayed consequences can hide the significance of present behavior. They explain how identity and repetition can reinforce each other. They explain why systems often outperform bursts of motivation. And they explain why small changes can matter even when immediate results are invisible. Perhaps the most practical consequence is that behavior change should be treated as experimentation rather than judgment. Suppose you want to read more but repeatedly fail. Instead of concluding that you lack discipline, change variables. Put the book somewhere visible. Choose something you actually want to read. Attach reading to an existing routine. Reduce the initial requirement. Move your phone. Try mornings instead of evenings. Try audio during a commute. Notice what repeatedly interrupts you. The question becomes less moral. What conditions make this behavior easier? Suppose you want to stop ordering expensive takeout. Again, investigate. When does it happen? Perhaps you order food at 7:30 because you arrive home hungry and nothing is prepared. The problem may occur hours before the order. Maybe the crucial habit is deciding dinner before leaving work, or keeping 3 extremely easy meals available, or eating a small afternoon snack so hunger does not become an emergency. The visible behavior is the order. The system generating the order may begin much earlier. This is a powerful way to think. Look upstream. A person who stays up too late may focus on bedtime, but perhaps the real problem is that evenings are their only unscheduled personal time, so going to bed feels like surrendering freedom. A person who procrastinates may focus on deadlines, but perhaps tasks are consistently vague, making the first action unclear. A person who skips exercise may focus on motivation, but perhaps every planned workout requires 40 minutes of travel. A person who forgets medication may blame memory, when the real issue is that the medication has no stable cue in the daily routine. Good systems often solve problems upstream. They change the conditions that repeatedly create the unwanted decision, and that is far more durable than winning the same battle every day. Think of a river carrying garbage through a town. Every morning, Residents stand downstream, collecting trash from the water. They become extraordinarily efficient. They buy better nets. They organize teams. They measure how many bags they collect. They celebrate record cleanup days. Eventually, someone walks upstream and asks why garbage keeps entering the river. Habit change at its best is that upstream walk. Instead of repeatedly fighting the visible result, investigate the structure producing it. But eventually, we must walk even farther upstream. Why do we want the change at all? Why read more? Why exercise? Why earn more? Why become productive? Why meditate? Why organize the house? Why wake early? There is no universally correct answer. And this is where a book about habits quietly becomes a book about life. A habit is a repeated answer to the question, what do I do next? A life is made from thousands of those answers. Most are small. Some are almost invisible. Get out of bed. Pick up the phone. Open the laptop. Say hello. Make coffee. Take the stairs. Spend the money. Close the tab. Call the friend. Read another page. Go to sleep. No individual decision seems large enough to deserve philosophical attention. But together, repeated decisions create patterns. Patterns create capabilities. Patterns shape relationships. Patterns influence what receives our attention. And attention repeated over years becomes something very close to a life. This does not mean we should become anxious about every tiny choice. That would be unbearable. The point of habits is almost the opposite. Choose certain patterns deliberately so that you do not have to obsess over every choice. Build a few defaults that support what matters. Let the environment carry part of the burden. Make beneficial actions easier to begin. Make destructive patterns slightly less convenient. Allow identity to emerge from evidence rather than fantasy. Expect disruption. Return without drama. Measure what helps, but remember why you are measuring. Use goals for direction, but do not confuse the finish line with the machinery that gets you there. And remain willing to redesign the machinery when life changes. Perhaps this is the most important difference between a goal and a system. A goal imagines a future moment when something will finally be different. The weight will be lost. The money will be saved. The book will be written. The degree will be earned. The business will be launched. The room will be clean. The system asks a more demanding question. What happens Tuesday morning after the excitement is gone? What happens when nobody is watching? What happens when progress is too small to feel? What happens after success? What happens after failure? What happens when life interrupts the plan? The answers to those questions determine whether change survives contact with ordinary life. And ordinary life is where almost everything happens. The great transformations we admire from a distance often conceal thousands of unremarkable repetitions. Not all success comes from habits. Not all suffering can be solved through systems. Not every person has equal control over their environment, and no behavioral framework can capture the full complexity of human motivation. But there is still something quietly radical in taking small, repeated actions seriously. It means accepting that the person you become may be shaped less by rare moments of extraordinary motivation than by ordinary behaviors that eventually stop feeling extraordinary at all. The first workout is difficult. Then exercise becomes part of Tuesday. The first page is deliberate. Then reading becomes part of bedtime. The first transfer requires thought. Then saving happens automatically. The first difficult conversation requires courage. Then honesty becomes part of the relationship. The first time you resist an old pattern, you may feel as though you are acting against yourself. After enough repetitions, something strange can happen. The new behavior begins to feel like you. And perhaps lasting change is not the moment when you finally force yourself to become a different person. Perhaps it is the gradual construction of conditions in which a different way of living becomes increasingly natural. Goals can point toward that life. Motivation can start the movement. Willpower can rescue difficult moments, but none of them is designed to carry the entire weight indefinitely. Systems distribute that weight across routines, environments, cues, expectations, and repeated choices. Eventually, the extraordinary ambition that began the change becomes less important than the ordinary structure that keeps it alive. And that may be the paradox at the center of lasting transformation. We imagine change as a dramatic act of becoming. In practice, it often looks like returning to something small, again and again and again, until one day, the action that once required effort has become part of the architecture of your life. At that point, the most interesting question is no longer whether you achieved the goal, it is what your system has been quietly teaching you to become.